Welcome to Mindfulness for the Soul, your daily dose of mental health insights, with your host, John Silamparis.
After a tragic event occurs, and we lose family or close friends that are near and dear to us, the word closure seems to float around a lot. It floats like a mandatory step in the grief protocol that we are pressured to engage in. But what does closure really mean? Well, for example, in the traditional sense, after losing a loved one, closure is an attempt to move on or let go, or better yet, get over the loss. However, human attachment, as we know, is very powerful, and it does not easily dissolve. The bonds we develop with loved ones are immeasurable. So closure is like trying to sever the ties we have with our newly departed ones, ties that can never really be severed. The truth is, when someone close to us dies, looking for closure is actually a very inappropriate expectation. It infers that we must somehow abruptly abandon our attachment and move on, as if suddenly the person we have just lost does not matter to us, or that their life never affected us. The mythology of closure is that to survive a loss, we must rapidly attain a state of healing. We have to pick ourselves up, let go of the past, and focus on the living. But the oversimplification of closure as a mandatory action to take when tragedy strikes can actually impair our ability to learn to live with it. Closure suggests that it's quite possible to forget something that you cannot ever forget. Furthermore, closure implies a single event or a destination to arrive at, which is how most people see it, but it is simply not the case. In contrast, bereavement or grieving is more of a process involving the mind, the heart, and the soul as it learns to coexist with deep wounds that never heal. Like a scar that leaves a mark and remains visible for life. Over time, the scar fades, but never disappears entirely. When both my parents died in 2004, 13 days apart to be exact, the heaviness of my grief crashed into me like a freight train. And now, almost 16 years later, I managed to comfort myself by surrounding my home with photos of my mother and father in happier times when they were healthy and unburdened by their illnesses. The sorrowful ache is still there. Remembering them and the pain they went through is like running my fingers along the scar every day. Sometimes the nerve endings are so sensitive that it hurts to look back. But I know I have to. After a loved one dies, a personal journey begins of emotionally evolving and growing into a different kind of self-awareness. This self-awareness helps us make the unspoken yet necessary agreement with ourselves to submit and live by life's terms, which typically means that over the course of our lives, people we love will die, and we accept that. But how we respond to it is up to us. No one is allowed to tell us when we are done grieving because it's not quantifiable. Dramatic events from the past and the loss of loved ones carves deep grooves in our psyche that may stay with us for a long time. Whenever our sense of safety and security is shattered by these types of events, restoring that emotional stability is not a simple undertaking. The central nervous system needs time to reset and process the loss of that very same safety and security that was taken away. Here are a few myths about human grieving that need to be broken down. Remember, grieving is a natural and healthy response to a loss that should never be understated or taken for granted. Whether it's grieving after a loved one dies, divorce, severe injury, illness, loss of job or property, etc., allowing ourselves to grieve and navigate through this painful process helps the mind and heart to mend more appropriately, and over time may give us some peace. Myth number 1 is don't try to discuss the loss with a grieving person. That is incorrect. People who are grieving are usually grateful when someone expresses concern and care about how they are feeling. They need to debrief about the loss on a regular basis. They need to share memories and talk about how much pain they are in. The more they talk about it, the better they will feel in the long run. Myth number 2. If I stop grieving about the loss, it means I have forgotten about my loved one. This is also incorrect. The truth is, we never really move on, as we've been discussing, because the memory of the loss will always be with us. But as time goes by, it changes from a painful memory to a fond memory filled with happier times and warm remembrances. Healing does not mean forgetting about our loved one or abandoning their memory. Also, getting better and healing means we are taking care of ourselves and being responsible to others that may need us right now. We are indeed still accountable to the living, especially if we have children to raise or we are caring for the elderly. Myth number 3. Children should be spared the grief and sheltered from the pain. This is also untrue. Children need to grieve also. Age-appropriate children need to be gently told about the loss in an honest and delicate way. Keeping it from them may lead them to believe they are incapable of handling the pain. They may learn to fear their sadness and not trust in their abilities to overcome adversity. Plus, not telling them will only prolong their sorrow, and they may build resentment against you for withholding it from them. So what if we consider grief as a new beginning instead of an ending? Sounds crazy, but why not? Why not think of it as something new? A new start. What do I mean by that? It's important to remember that navigating through the grief and loss continuum at any level is a lifelong course. We don't try to accelerate it. The human heart is not a car engine that can be greased, oiled, and subsequently tuned up to perform better. It's not a bad idea to look under the hood every now and then, but you may not always find the answers in there. So, we try to look at grieving or closure as a beginning, albeit an involuntary one, to a new life of learning to cope with the inevitable and the catastrophic. In this case, the death of a loved one and/or an obliterated sense of safety and security. This new beginning asks the opposite of what closure expects of us. It asks us to learn to live with not forgetting and not getting over it because we can't. We learn to coexist with the liability of owning a human heart and the constant reminder that we will always be scarred. Why? Because the valuable perspective gained from referring back to that scar periodically reminds us that we dared to love others and they loved us back. The depth of each scar we are left with conceivably indicates the quality of our love, a memento of the meaningful human connections we all seek, no matter who we are. In other words, we yield to the finite nature of all mortal relationships. We are born, we get attached, we love, and then inevitably we die. Poet and philosopher Yehuda Halevi said, quote, "'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch." Thank you for listening to another episode of Mindfulness for the Soul. I hope you found some of this helpful. And always remember to be kind to yourself this week and every day. This is John Silimparis, MFT.